On a rainy afternoon, when most people were rushing to get to the warmth of their homes, a quiet act of kindness was about to change everything for a woman who had long given up on hope. Li Wei, a humble woman with a kind heart, was out running errands when she saw a boy lying unconscious in the middle of the street. The rain poured down relentlessly, but the sight of the boy, his face pale, his clothes torn, stirred something deep inside her. Without a second thought, she rushed to his side, gathering all her strength to pull him out of harm's way. Little did she know this simple act of compassion would lead her into a whirlwind of love, secrets, and life-changing twists. She carefully carried him to a nearby shelter, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the blood from his head injury. She didn't know who this boy was, but the way his body was limp in her arms, the way his breathing was shallow, made it clear that he needed help, fast. In that moment, Li Wei didn't care about anything else. All that mattered was saving this boy's life. She cleaned his wound, wrapped him in a warm blanket, and waited for him to wake up. When he finally did, his eyes were filled with confusion, but also a strange sense of gratitude. She had no idea who he was, but it was clear that this boy wasn't just anyone. His words were measured, his demeanor different. He wasn't from around here. "Thank you for saving me," he whispered weakly. "I don't know how to repay you." Li Wei smiled softly, brushing back her hair. "Don't worry about it. I'm just glad you're okay." However, the boy's next words left her speechless. "You saved me, and now I'm going to make sure your life changes." Confused, Li Wei asked, "What do you mean?" The boy remained silent for a moment, staring at her, as if weighing whether to reveal the truth. Finally, he spoke again, his voice serious. "I'm the grandson of the CEO of the largest corporation in this city, Qin Corporation. My name is Qin Jun." Li Wei's breath caught in her throat. Qin Jun. The name carried weight. The Qin family was known for their wealth, their power, and their influence. And now this boy, this stranger, claimed to be their heir. Her heart raced as she tried to process what he was saying. What did this mean for her? As the days passed, Qin Jun's condition improved, but he remained in the shelter, and they continued to talk. The more Li Wei got to know him, the more she realized that there was something different about this boy, something beyond his wealth and status. He had a gentleness, an innocence about him that didn't align with the cold, corporate world of his family. He trusted her, something that was rare for someone of his stature. And as they spent time together, an unspoken bond began to form between them. But just when things seemed to be taking a peaceful turn, Li Wei's life was about to be upended in ways she couldn't have anticipated. One evening, after Qin Jun had recovered enough to leave the shelter, he asked Li Wei to come with him. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said, with a mysterious glint in his eyes. She agreed, unsure of what she was getting into, but curious nonetheless. When they arrived at the grandiose mansion, the gates opened to reveal a sprawling estate. The air was thick with tension, and Li Wei felt an overwhelming sense of intimidation. Qin Jun led her inside, where an older man stood waiting for them. His sharp gaze made her feel small, like she didn't belong. But Qin Jun seemed completely at ease, almost as though he was ready to fight for her. "Father, this is the woman I was telling you about," Qin Jun said, his voice steady. Li Wei felt a pang of unease. The man in front of her was none other than the CEO of Qin Corporation, Qin Mingde. His reputation preceded him, and she knew of his ruthless nature. He was a man who controlled an empire, but behind his success, there were whispers of a cold, calculating heart. Qin Mingde's gaze fell on her, and for a moment, it felt like he was assessing her very soul. "So, You're the one my son speaks of, he said, his tone unreadable. Li Wei could hardly find her voice. I don't understand. Why did you bring me here? Qin Jun stepped forward, his voice full of determination. I want her to be a part of our family. At his words, everything seemed to stop. Li Wei was taken aback, unsure of what to think or feel. What was going on? Why did this boy, this CEO's son, want her in his life so badly? Qin Mingde looked at her with a piercing gaze. You're just an ordinary woman, Li Wei. What do you think you can offer to our family? His words were harsh, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something she couldn't quite understand. But Qin Jun wouldn't back down. Father, you don't understand. She's different. I need her. Li Wei's heart raced. And for the first time, she began to see the depth of Qin Jun's feelings. This wasn't just about saving him. It was about something far greater, something she couldn't yet comprehend. And then, in a moment of silence, Qin Jun made a surprising offer. If you marry my father, I will make sure your life changes forever. I can't promise it will be easy, but I will make sure you never have to struggle again. Li Wei's world tilted on its axis. Marry the CEO? Was he serious? What was happening? Could she really become a part of this world? A world of wealth and power? Or was this all just a dream? Could she trust a boy who barely knew her, and a man who seemed to hold all the cards? With her heart pounding, Li Wei faced a choice that would change her life forever. Would she accept this dangerous offer and step into a world she didn't understand? Or would she walk away, leaving behind a chance at a new life, and perhaps love? But just as she was about to answer, Qin Mingde's eyes darkened. Be careful, Li Wei, he warned. This world is not as simple as you think. And with that, the tension between them hung heavy in the air, as the storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil brewing in her heart. What would she do next? Would she dare to accept the offer, or would she find herself tangled in a web of deception and power she could never escape? The story had only just begun. Li Wei couldn't shake the weight of Qin Mingde's words. They echoed in her mind, each syllable like a heavy stone pressing down on her chest. This world is not as simple as you think. What did he mean by that? Was he warning her, or was he trying to scare her off? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she had been thrown into a world far bigger and more complicated than she could have imagined. Over the next few days, the thoughts kept coming back to her. The offer to marry Qin Mingde, the CEO of Qin Corporation, was tempting. The surface. Her life as it wasn't easy. She had struggled for years to make ends meet, working long hours at various jobs, just to scrape by. Her small apartment, the one that always felt too cramped and cold, was a constant reminder of how little she had accomplished. But the possibility of marrying into one of the wealthiest families in the city, it could change everything. She could escape her struggles, live a life of comfort, maybe even find happiness in a world where wealth and power were everything. But then there was the matter of Qin Jun. He was kind, and despite his claims of being the heir to Qin Corporation, he seemed so different from his family. He was genuine, someone who seemed to care about her, someone who had been grateful for her help when he had been nothing more than an injured boy lying in the street. But did his father, Qin Mingde, share that same kindness? Was he truly someone Li Wei could trust? The more Li Wei thought about the offer, the more conflicted she became. Qin Mingde's power and wealth were undeniable, but so was the danger that came with them. She had heard whispers of the ruthless decisions he made, of the coldness that ran through the veins of the Qin family. They were known to crush anyone who got in their way, and Li Wei wasn't sure if she was strong enough to survive that world. Could she handle the manipulation, the backstabbing, and the dangerous games that seemed to be a part of their every move. Her doubts only grew when Chin Jun's words from that night resurfaced. "I want you to be a part of our family." Was it really that simple for him? Could a kind woman like her truly belong in such a cold, corporate world? Or was Chin Jun just trying to save her from herself, from a life of hardship? The tension continued to build as days turned into weeks. Chin Jun remained persistent, visiting her often, and every time he did, he spoke of his father, of the company, and of the life she could have if she agreed to marry him. But Li Wei couldn't help but wonder what was at play beneath the surface. Was this all part of some grand plan? Something much bigger than she could understand? It was then that she started to notice the subtle signs of tension in Chin Jun's life. His once carefree attitude started to crack, revealing a side of him that seemed lost, trapped within the very world he had been born into. Despite the riches that came with his last name, he was clearly struggling with his family's expectations. The more she got to know him, the more Li Wei realized that he wasn't just a boy who wanted to escape his family's control. He was someone who had been forced into a life he didn't want, someone who didn't want to inherit the ruthless empire that his father had built. One night, after a particularly tense dinner with Qin Mingde, Chin Jun confided in Li Wei, revealing the true depth of his struggle. "I didn't choose this life, Li Wei. My father, he has always expected me to take over Qin Corporation. But I don't want that. I don't want to play his games. I want to live my life with you." His words were raw, filled with the vulnerability Li Wei had rarely seen. For the first time, she felt like she could truly see him, the boy who was trapped in a world of expectation, of power, and of manipulation. But his confession only complicated things further. Was he asking her to marry him to escape his father's grasp? Or was there something deeper between them? Li Wei wasn't sure, but she couldn't ignore the growing feelings she had for him. He had been kind to her from the very beginning, and there was something about the way he looked at her, like she was the only person who understood him, that made her heart ache. As the days passed, Li Wei found herself pulled deeper into the world of the Qin family. She attended meetings with Qin Mingde, where the tension was palpable. It became clear that Qin Mingde wasn't someone who tolerated weakness or hesitation. He was sharp, calculating, and used his power to manipulate everyone around him. Li Wei couldn't help but feel like a pawn in his game, someone he could easily dispose of once she had served her purpose. But what was her purpose in all this? Was it truly just to marry Qin Mingde, to become the wife of a powerful man and gain access to his wealth? Or was there something more? The closer she got to the truth, the more she realized that she was caught in a dangerous web of lies, power struggles, and family secrets. It was then that Li Wei learned the truth about Qin Mingde's intentions. Despite his cold demeanor, he had a plan to secure his legacy, and it involved Qin Jun marrying a woman who could bring the Qin family even more power. Li Wei was the perfect candidate, an innocent woman who could be manipulated into marrying his son, thus securing the family's position in the city's elite circles. She wasn't just a potential wife. She was a tool, a means to an end. Furious and heartbroken, Li Wei confronted Qin Jun, demanding the truth. "Was I just a pawn in your father's game?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Is that all I am to you?" Qin Jun's face was a mixture of guilt and desperation. "No, Li Wei. You mean more to me than that. I never wanted any of this. But my father, he won't let me walk away from it." The weight of his words sank in, and Li Wei realized that she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no clear way out. She could feel herself being pulled deeper into a world of greed, manipulation, and power struggles. The more she learned, the more she realized that the truth was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. But just as the tension reached its peak, and Li Wei stood at the crossroads of a decision that would change her life forever, she received a call that would alter everything. It was from an unknown number, a voice she didn't recognize. The words on the other end of the line made her blood run cold. Li Wei, there's something you don't know about Qin Mingde, and if you marry him, you'll regret it. The call ended abruptly, leaving her with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Who was this person? And what did they know about Qin Mingde that she didn't? The mystery deepened, and Li Wei knew that the danger she faced was far from over. The phone call still lingered in Li Wei's mind, the words echoing through her thoughts. You'll regret it. Who could have known about Qin Mingde in such detail? And what was this mysterious person trying to warn her about? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the world she was stepping into was far darker and more complicated than she had ever imagined. Every step seemed to lead her further into a labyrinth of lies, power, and dangerous secrets. For days, Li Wei couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being a puppet in a game she didn't fully understand. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Qin Jun, who had once seemed like her ally. His father's hold over him was too strong, and she feared that his feelings for her, however genuine, couldn't protect her from the chaos that surrounded them. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had to make a choice. Was she willing to dive into this world, risking everything for the chance of love and a better life? Or should she walk away before it consumed her? The tension reached its peak one evening when Qin Mingde invited Li Wei to a private meeting, a rare occurrence that sent a chill down her spine. He sat across from her, his expression unreadable. There was something cold about the way he looked at her, as if he was sizing her up, calculating his next move. Li Wei, he began, his voice smooth, but with a hardness to it. I'm sure you've heard things about me, about our family, but you must understand, I'm doing this for the future of the Qin family, for its survival. Li Wei's heart raced. What do you want from me? Qin Mingde leaned forward slightly. Marry my son. Help him step into the role he was born to play. Together, you'll strengthen the Qin Corporation's position, and in return, I will ensure your future is secure, one that you couldn't even dream of. The words hit her like a hammer. She knew what he was offering: power, influence, a life of comfort and luxury. But she also knew the price: her freedom, her dignity, and perhaps her very soul. Just as the weight of his proposal settled in, Li Wei heard a voice behind her. She doesn't have to choose that life, father. It was Qin Jun. He stepped into the room, his expression a mix of determination and fear. I'm not going to force her into this. I never wanted any of this. You don't get to decide my life for me, or hers. Li Wei turned to him, shocked. For the first time, she saw the true conflict in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting for himself, against the man who had shaped him, against the life that had been forced upon him, the man who had controlled his every move and who now sought to control her as well. The tension in the room was palpable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Li Wei took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of the choices before her. I won't be your pawn, she said, her voice firm but shaky. I can't be part of your world if it means losing myself. I came here to help, not to be trapped. Qin Mingde's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched out, thick with unspoken tension. Li Wei could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the reality of what she had just said sank in. Qin Jun, his face pale, looked at his father one last time. I'm done, father. I'm not living for the company anymore. I'm living for myself. and I'm not going to let anyone make that decision for me again." With that, he turned to Li Wei, his face softening. "You don't have to marry me, Li Wei. You don't owe me anything. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has." The words broke through Li Wei's walls. She had never expected such an admission. Never expected him to fight for her. Like this. The conflict she had been struggling with, the choice between love and power, suddenly seemed simpler. She had to follow her heart, and for the first time, she knew what she had to do. Turning to Qin Mingde, Li Wei made a final decision. "This isn't the life for me, and it's not the life for Qin Jun either. He deserves a future built on his own terms, not one dictated by you or anyone else." Qin Mingde said nothing, his face hardening as the reality of the situation set in. The power he had always wielded, the control he had over his son, was slipping away. But Li Wei knew that, for all his power, he couldn't control the heart. Li Wei walked away from the Qin Corporation, hand in hand with Qin Jun. She felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead wasn't easy, and the challenges they faced were still very real. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anyone decide her future for her. She had found her strength, her voice, and with it, the courage to walk away from the life that had once seemed so enticing, but that would have never truly been hers. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like she was on the right path. And with Qin Jun by her side, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together on their own terms. As the door to the Qin family's world closed behind them, Li Wei took a deep breath. She had chosen love over power, freedom over control, and that in the end was the greatest victory she could have ever asked for. The story of Li Wei and Qin Jun was far from over, but as they walked toward their future, hand in hand, the possibilities seemed endless. And for the first time, the world felt wide open.